In 1924, 16-year-old Calvin Coolidge Jr. was playing tennis on the White House lawn, without socks. He developed a small blister on his toe. A week later, the son of the most powerful man on the planet was dead. Sepsis, blood poisoning. Doctors were powerless. Money and power couldn't buy salvation from a scratch. This was a world where bacteria reigned supreme, and humanity was their defenseless victim. Medicine of that era was akin to fighting a fire with a bucket of water. A doctor could alleviate pain with morphine, amputate a limb, and hope for a miracle. A common sore throat could trigger rheumatic fever and stop a heart. Childbed fever made childbirth a deadly lottery. 1 in 5 children didn't live to see their 5th birthday, succumbing to infections that we now cure in 3 days. The world lived in constant, quiet dread of an invisible enemy. That's why the story of penicillin isn't just a success story. It's a detective novel with 3 mysteries. First, why did the greatest discovery of the 20th century, made in 1928, languish on the shelf for almost 15 years? Second, how did 3 incredible coincidences, a mess, the weather, and a lucky strain of mold, combine to create a perfect storm? And third, why couldn't Fleming himself, having witnessed the miracle, turn it into a medicine? The key to the first mystery was the mess and the man who created it, Alexander Fleming. His laboratory wasn't a temple of science, but a biological crime scene. Petri dishes were piled in dirty stacks, but this chaos was creative. Fleming loved to paint with living bacteria. He used microbes of different colors to create images on culture media, dancers, houses, soldiers. For him, science was a form of art, and the laboratory, his studio. Look at your hands right now. See a small scratch, a hangnail. Today, it's just a minor nuisance. But in the world before penicillin, in the world of Fleming and President Coolidge, it wasn't just a cosmetic defect, it was a potential death sentence, an open gate for an infection that nothing could stop. On September 3, 1928, Fleming returned from a month-long vacation to his laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital. He wasn't alone. Showing a mountain of dirty Petri dishes to his colleague, Dr. Price, he complained about the mess he would have to clear up. And then his gaze caught on one of them. There was no cry of, "Eureka." There was only a quiet, puzzled phrase. "That's funny." Here's what he saw, as if in slow motion. A colony of Staphylococcus aureus was growing on the culture medium, but not everywhere. In one spot, it was interrupted by a blue-green patch of mold. And around this patch, a clear, transparent halo had formed. It was like a tiny, perfect circle of emptiness in a dense forest of bacteria, a zone of death. The mold spore itself, Penicillium rubens, most likely drifted in from the mycologist's lab downstairs. This wasn't just luck, it was a stroke of serendipity. But Fleming wasn't the first to notice this. In 1897, a 23-year-old French medical student, Ernst, proved that mold killed bacteria and even cured guinea pigs of typhoid with it. He wrote a dissertation. But the Pasteur Institute disregarded the work of an unknown young man. 10 years later, Duchesne died of tuberculosis. Fleming's genius wasn't in seeing it, but in understanding it and persisting. He immediately sprang into action. Before the elegant name penicillin emerged, Fleming simply and directly called the substance mold juice. This nickname perfectly described what he was dealing with, an unstable broth containing something lethal to microbes. He quickly tested the juice on his assistants, dropping it into their eyes and noses. The verdict? It was absolutely harmless to humans. And yet, this discovery might not have happened. It was saved by the weather. The summer of 1928 in London was unusually cold. Fleming left the dish on his lab bench and departed. Mold thrives in cool conditions, while Staphylococcus prefers the warmth of the human body. Because of the cold, the mold had time to grow and release its antibiotic before the weather warmed up and the bacteria began to proliferate actively. Had the summer been hot, the Staphylococcus would have simply eaten the spore, leaving no trace. History hung by a thread, and on the thermometer readings. But here, Fleming hit a wall. He had found gold in the mountain, but he had neither pickaxe nor shovel to extract it. He was a bacteriologist, not a chemist. He couldn't isolate the pure active substance from his mold juice. His substance was unstable and lost its potency within a few days. The discovery was made, but a medicine was still a very long way off. Fleming presented his findings at the Medical Research Club, but he was a genius in the lab and a disaster at the podium. His speech was dry, monotonous, devoid of any drama. He wasn't selling a dream of a world free from infections. He was simply reporting on the strange behavior of mold. And the scientific community responded with a polite yawn. His discovery was considered no more than a laboratory curiosity. An interesting chemical reagent, useful for staining bacteria in a petri dish, not a world-saving medicine. 10 years. During that time, millions died from infections that penicillin could have stopped. Each year claimed more lives than many wars. But Fleming didn't try to patent the discovery. He sought neither fame nor profit. On the contrary, he acted like a true scientist. He turned his lab into a post office, freely sending samples of his mold to any colleague who asked. He hoped that someone else, a chemist, could solve the puzzle that had eluded him. This open-door policy for a miracle saved penicillin from complete oblivion. Imagine this story as a relay race. Fleming ran his leg brilliantly. He passed the baton, but for the next 10 years, it just lay on the dusty track. The world ran past, oblivious to it. And now, the main question for the next level, who and why decided to pick up what everyone else considered useless junk when it seemed the race was already lost? The answer came from Oxford, from Sir William Dunn School of Pathology. This was a team resembling a scientific commando unit. At its head was Howard Florey, an Australian, a tough and pragmatic strategist. Beside him was Norman Heatley, an engineering genius capable of assembling a doomsday machine for microbes from tin cans and bicycle pumps. But the linchpin was Ernst Chain, a brilliant biochemist, a Jewish refugee who had fled Germany from the Nazis, a man who knew from personal experience what it meant to fight a deadly force. In 1939, sifting through old scientific literature in search of a research topic, he stumbled upon Fleming's forgotten article from a decade earlier. What they built wasn't a sterile laboratory, but rather a biological moonshine distillery. Their starting capital, a grant of just £25, they desperately needed containers to grow mold on an industrial scale by their standards. And they used everything they could get their hands on: bedpans, milk churns, ceramic baths, the elixir of life, capable of changing the course of history, literally bubbled and matured in makeshift containers in the damp basement of an old building. It was a scientific feat accomplished on a shoestring. May 25, 1940. While Germany invaded France, launching the most devastating war in history, their own battle was unfolding in an Oxford basement. Their next step was brutal and simple. 8 mice were infected with a lethal dose of streptococcus, 4 were injected with penicillin, 4 were left to die. In the morning, the scene was biblical. 4 were dead, 4 were perfectly healthy. This was the green light, permission to begin human trials. Their first patient was Albert Alexander, a 43-year-old constable. His story echoed the tragedy of President Coolidge's son. It began with a trifle, a scratch from a rose thorn in his own garden. By February 1941, he was a living ghost. His body was a map of suppurating abscesses. The infection had eaten into his lungs and even his eye, which had to be removed. He was doomed. He received the first injection, and a miracle occurred. Within 24 hours, his temperature dropped, his appetite returned, the abscesses began to heal. But the elixir was catastrophically scarce. The entire world's supply of penicillin was coursing through this one man's veins. And then the team took a desperate, almost medieval step. They collected Alexander's urine. And Norman Heatley, the engineering genius, in his improvised laboratory, extracted the precious drug from it again. The medicine literally passed through the patient and returned to him in the next injection. It was the most successful failure in medical history. For 5 days, Albert Alexander returned to life. And then the drug ran out. All of it. To the last drop. The team scraped out all their vats and churns, but it wasn't enough. The disease returned with renewed vigor, and the constable died. His death was not a defeat. It was proof. It screamed two things. First, penicillin was magic. Second, it needed to be produced by the ton for this magic to work. The tragedy of one man became a ticket to life for millions. Britain was under bombardment. There were neither resources nor time for mass production. In the summer of 1941, Florey and Heatley secretly transported their mold spores to the United States. They soaked the linings of their coats with them in case their luggage was destroyed. In America, a nationwide search for a better strain began. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A lab assistant named Mary Hunt, nicknamed Moldy Mary, brought a rotten cantaloupe melon from a market in Peoria, Illinois. The mold on this melon produced hundreds of times more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. Almost all the penicillin in the world for decades was produced by descendants of that very melon. And this changed the game on the battlefield. By the D-Day landings in 1944, the Allies had produced 2.3 million doses, enough to treat every wounded soldier. Mortality from bacterial pneumonia in the Army plummeted from 18% to less than 1%. This medicine didn't just save lives, it changed the outcome of the war, returning to service those who would have been doomed. In 1945, Fleming, Florey, and Chain shared the Nobel Prize. The world entered a new era, the era of antibiotics. So what lessons can we learn from this scientific detective story? Here are 3 key rules. Let's call them the Fleming protocols. First, the dirty dish protocol. Be open to mess and mistakes. Sometimes the greatest opportunities hide in creative chaos, not in sterile order. Second, the funny detail protocol. When something doesn't go as planned, don't rush to discard it. Stop and ask yourself, that's funny. What if? The most important information often masquerades as an anomaly. Third, the baton pass protocol. A great idea is only the start, not the finish. You need to know when to pass it to someone with different skills. Just as Fleming, the bacteriologist, passed it to Florey and Chain, the chemists. And finally, the central question of this entire story. What do you think played the decisive role in it? Fleming's brilliant observation or pure incredible chance? Type genius or chance in the comments below.